It is time. Welcome to today's webinar on AI and human synergy and customer service, brought to you by CCW Digital and Sprinklr. I'm Brian Cantor, Principal Analyst for CCW, and your host for today's discussion. For the last several years, talk about the rise of AI was always accompanied by talk about how it will accentuate rather than eliminate humanity. The problem with this was that people were taking too simplified a view. They were reducing the experience into individual tasks, some that AI could do, and others that they felt humans still must do. This fragmented approach, frankly, created a worst of all world scenario in which AI was being deployed where maybe it was acceptable, but it certainly wasn't exceptional. And humans were often left to clean up inefficiencies and messes and not really reach that next level of relationship building, that next level of providing consultative care, that next level of going from answering questions or performing tasks to actually building connections and using their human ingenuity to elevate the overall experience. As 2026 approaches, we need to pivot from that. We need to go to what is supposed to be the case, not AI or humanity, but AI and humanity. Synergy that always puts humans or AI in best position to succeed and customers in best position to get the best possible experience. That will be the focus of today's webinar. And I'm not going to waste any more time hyping it up. We have a lot of great insights to get through. We have some case studies, examples, recommendations, everything you need to know to make AI human synergy a reality in your organization. So I want to take a moment to meet our speaker. So Frank, thrilled to have you here. Tell us about yourself, your background, and why this idea of better blending AI and humanity is so important moving forward.
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Frank Caprero, I'm from Sprinklr. I'm a lead solutions consultant here. I have a background in helping customers figure out the best way to deploy automations throughout the contact center. And I'm excited to talk to you about how sometimes we want to make the agents more empowered and turn those conversations that we thought were too rigorous, but actually give the agents power to actually complete those conversations. Give them the tools necessary to become the super agents.
I think that's so important. And again, we always talked about, we know agents have these abilities, right? We know inherently they can do things that, we don't necessarily believe AI can do, trust AI can do, want AI to do. We know there's a huge part of their role in the customer experience. The problem is that we're not putting them in position to unlock those abilities. We're not putting them in position to be that human, that consultant, that relationship builder. We're leaving them to just sort of do what they've always done, but just for more demanding customers and harder tasks, and that sets them up for failure. It sets your brand up for a poor look. And so I love that we're going to be diving into not only how do we shift the workflow, but how do we elevate the quality of the work? How do we elevate the engagement behind the work, the meaning behind the work, and make agents more empowered, customers happier? Now, Frank, I know we haven't, before we get started, I know we want to walk through the agenda here. So, anything you want to provide an overview as far as what we're going to learn throughout this discussion?
Yeah, so throughout this entire discussion, we're going to talk about the evolution of customer service in 2025, where we're at, what were some of the themes we saw with the advent of generative AI, and we thought how that was going to change everything, and some of the realities that we started experiencing. We're going to talk about the role of the agent in these conversations, and it really highlights what you said. We want to make them super agents, but they're just getting more and more complex conversations. And then we're going to go into some co-pilots and actually some live use cases of how customers are using these tools today to actually make an impact to their brand and become those super agents, those teams that can solve the complex problems.
And as a reminder, you can ask questions at any time using the console on your screen. As you heard from Frank's agenda, we have a lot to get to today, so not sure we'll get to every question, but Frank and the Sprinklr team are always so supportive about jumping in, answering questions after the fact. So if you have a question, they will connect with you, they will get you the answer, they will make sure you have what you need to build that synergy in your organization. Now, to dive in, though, I want to start with a reality here, one that we pretty much, it may pain us to admit, but we certainly can't deny, and that's that AI thus far hasn't been as transformative as many of us had hoped. We at CCW Digital have uncovered research showing that 50% of contact center leaders say their AI investments are moving slower than they expected. We know that 4 in 5 of these leaders say that their agents are still spending too much time on simple transactional work. And this isn't just behind the scenes, hey, we're holding ourselves to too high a standard. This is also trickling down to the customer, because right now, only 29% of consumers feel that AI is adding value to their experience. Now, this isn't it could easily be viewed as a condemnation of the technology, as a reality that AI doesn't play a role in the contact center, but that's the wrong view. The reality is that there have been some real problems with how we've thought about the technology, where the technology's been, how we've implemented it that have sort of stunted that growth, but things that can definitely change moving forward. So, Frank, I want to give you a chance to walk us through the landscape. Why thus far hasn't maybe AI lived up to that hype, but why should we be confident that it can and will moving forward?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a really good picture of what's happening in the industry and what people are expecting. So if we look back a few years ago when large language models were released, everyone said it's perfect. It's going to do everything. It's going to answer all my questions. It's going to solve all my responses. Everything's going to be possible. And then we started having conversations. We actually started working with the tools, being able to understand what's possible and not possible with these kinds of AI. And what we found and your metrics are actually really true and positive, is that it can't do everything right now. And the generative AI bots were not the agentic bots that we are talking about today. They were just able to go through and get responses, do simple flows, which are still great. They're still going to help contain as many conversations as possible. But what we're finding is that for that full agentic experience, you have to warm your customers up to it. They have to be able and feel the trust that I'm going to be able to solve my pain here with a bot or an AI. And then if not, I'm going to go to a human and they're going to be able to resolve it. So what we've actually found is that, and Sprinklr believes this heavily, is that AI is always there to help humans in the tango. And from that, it's helping the teams themselves build the best possible AI to solve those really simple use cases. When you want to check an order status, where's my return? I need to reset my password. Those are things that AI can definitely do and have a full, complete experience, whether it's on social, whether it's on email, or whether it's on voice and chat. All that is possible. But when you get to those meaty details, you want to be able to actually have the idea of passing information to agents where they can see why someone's contacting and then actually help them complete those more complex tasks. A few years ago, it might have been a little bit of a pipe dream of coming to fruition, but now we're actually seeing that this is possible and we can achieve those goals.
Yeah, and I think not only is that synergy, it's fundamentally important, but I think once we start to see the technology mature, it becomes a lot more feasible, right? Because the reality is that if a consumer, enters an AI-based self-service platform, they consistently just get a fancy FAQ page. They don't get one that's really dynamic, personalized, relevant, conversational. They bypass it. They skip it. They go straight to the agent. They yell representative, 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 and then you eliminate all the theoretical efficiency gains. So now that agent is dealing with far too many issues that should have been resolved by self-service, far too many that could have been automated. They then can't really take that next step. They can't take that next step of being able to focus on the more critical tasks, the more relationship-oriented things. Further, because the consumer bypassed the self-service environment, they're not even sharing a lot of the context that could be passed to the agent to make that agent able to personalize that next step. So you kind of have a lose-lose in that self-service there was a stigma toward it. It wasn't delivering what the customer wanted. But then because customers weren't even using it or weren't even sharing anything, or even if they were, so many organizations didn't have that natural handover, the agent then was almost starting from scratch. They weren't delivering superior care either. So it was the consumer was kind of getting not what they wanted from self-service, still very transactional support from the agent, and therefore they weren't happy. But the more that they see, hey, okay, AI is becoming more and more advanced, it's becoming more and more customer-centric, more and more capable of doing things, they're going to use it. They're going to engage. They're going to share information, which, if nothing else, qualifies them for a better routing, better escalation to a live person. Or ideally, it actually solves their problem. We also start to learn, okay, here's how the consumer is using these AI-based platforms. Here's what we need to do to adjust it to make it more valuable so we can really better create these workflows, better create these advantages. So ultimately, once AI starts to mature on the consumer-facing front, it really does dovetail into gains for the entire organization. However, there are still two things I want to be very mindful of. So when we talk about the AI for simple, humans for complex, even kind of echoing what you just said, where you talked about the forgotten passwords, the billing information, the stuff that can be done in AI, that implies that humans are there for that next tier of support, that next tier of engagement. But there are two challenges there. First of all, we still know that we have to fully flesh out what that complex work looks like. So 60% of contact center leaders say that by 2030, they don't want their agents focusing on simple tasks. Great. It makes a lot of sense from an operational standpoint, but what are they going to be focusing on? That hasn't been really fully discovered or defined by a lot of organizations. Two, if we do, though, assume at the high level that those tasks are going to be more human, more conversational, more consultative in nature, then we would expect that employees are demonstrating a lot of empathy, a lot of expertise, a lot of confidence, a lot of emotional intelligence. And our data suggests that right now, today's agents aren't quite there. The overwhelming majority of consumers do not feel that employees are knowledgeable. They do not feel that they're overly empathetic. And shockingly and disappointingly, more than 60% don't even feel that they're friendly. And so, what I want to get from you, Frank, is first of all, if you have a view of what the agent of the future should be focused on as AI does take more of a role in the front end of the experience. And two, what are ways that maybe even AI itself can help close some of these competency gaps and these quality gaps and ensure that agents are ready for that next generation of work?
Yeah. So it's really insightful. And the more customers I talk to, the more people who work in the contact center who have those conversations, they don't know why customers are contacting them. They have an idea, they have a disposition, they're logging something on the system, they're creating a case, but a lot of times they don't get to the actual reason why there's a conversation here. And I'm going to say the word conversation a lot today because it's not just that phone call, it's not just that chat, but it's every way a customer can reach out to you. And today there's more ways than ever with the social channels and the advent of phones and people having all these technologies. But the point is that all those conversations can give you insight. So you have to start by understanding why are customers contacting you. When you start understanding the why, you can narrow it down again to, okay, they contacted us for this reason. Let's ask the question why again and again and again. So using the 5 whys methodology, you're going to go to that root cause of why someone's contacting you. From there, you can find those really common use cases that someone's contacting you that actually can be automated in a simple way. And you can start doing this across whatever key channel your team cares about, whether it's voice, digital, social. Start there to address your customers' needs. But when you get there, you raised a good point, Brian. Those conversations are still going to go to humans. And we want to make sure that when they get there, they can be more empathetic. They can have the ability to actually handle these conversations. If you look at how customers come in and out of contact centers, it takes a lot of time to get a team trained. And those best agents have a sheet of paper or a document on the side that says, these are the tasks I'm going to do to get things done. The other way we can start helping these team members is by taking those insights and democratizing it to the rest of the agents themselves. So we're going to have the ability to understand why customers are contacting you and being able to build the simplest experiences possible that AI can help. And then also taking the information that the best agents use and turning those into co-pilots or AI tools to actually help the rest of the team start more focusing on the empathy of the conversations and less focused on actually just being like, how do I remember how to log a case in Salesforce? How do I remember how to log a case in a CRM or open a ticket? More focused on, let me actually help you with your pain because someone's already documented it and it's now not in their book, but it's in everyone has access to it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and we're going to spend pretty much the balance of the webinar going through how we bring that to reality. But I think you hit on an important point. It's not even just a skill issue. I think when I shared some of those damning stats, you might look at it and say, "Oh, we're hiring the wrong people," or "the people we're hiring are not meant for next generation, more conversational work." And I'm sure in some contact centers across the world that might be true to a degree. I don't know that we were always hiring people with the standard of they're going to be relationship builders, they're going to be upselling and cross-selling and taking things to the next level. But it's not true of all agents. The reality is agents are fundamentally capable of having real, empathetic, relatable conversations with customers. They are capable of adapting to tone and personalizing their interactions. But if they're still overwhelmed with basic tasks, if they're distracted by having to, like you said, remember basic processes or how to access basic systems, they literally don't have the time. And even if they do, they don't have the cognitive load to really be able to adapt to the customer in the right way and be more conversational. And so thinking about ways to make that easier and in fact use AI to do that, certainly critical. Now, that naturally explains why this idea of agent assist or co-pilot, or it comes under different names in different organizations, is such a high priority. When you look at top AI use cases, it's often like the AI agent or chatbot or customer-facing self-service is kind of 1A, and 1B is often agent assist or co-pilot, as kind of top priorities. But we also want to be mindful that as we think about what agent assist or copilot would look like in theory, it can't just be a AI version of a script. If all it is basically saying, here, say this, then the agent's not in position to do anything that, say, a chatbot couldn't do on its own. Obviously, you want to be giving them the tools they need to not spend too much time thinking about what to say and to getting to like how to say it, how to use it, how to build relationships. So I want to get into Sprinklr's vision for what Copilot looks like. And then maybe you could walk through how it works, how it leads to advantages, some scenarios, anything you want to share to crystallize that this is not a script. It's not an automated, just say this. This is a pathway to better relationships.
Yeah. So it all starts with first going through and triaging those conversations. So taking a step away from the co-pilots, it is really important to go through and understand why someone's contacting you. So that's a start. But then when it gets to a conversation, how can you ensure that the agent itself has access to the tools they need? So it's not just reading from a knowledge base article the same way a bot would, but it's actually allowing them to build specific tasks. So that's where our co-pilots come into play. So Sprinklr's co-pilots allow you to actually not only yes, it presents the answer. They can ask questions. Of course they can. Of course they can find information they might forget day to day. But more importantly, it allows them to do an order status lookup. It allows them to go through and summarize a complete case, get a full picture of who Frank is when he contacts your brand. How did Frank contact you? How does he contact you always? Is he always contacting you because he loses his glasses and he has to buy new ones? Let's make sure we know that information right away. And this becomes something that's actually trackable. So your agent will have less time looking up information on various systems and more time actually using the co-pilots themselves. And they're going to start flagging when they need a new specific task, when they need the ability to send them a quick email, the ability to channel switch someone, the ability to actually understand what's the next best action to get that upsell. So this is recommending options, but also giving agents a quick tool to say, how can I do this better? So I have to spend less time going over here and going over there and more time focused on Brian in the conversation contacting us or Frank coming in for his glasses.
Yeah, and I think what was really great about that is you focused on one, rooting this all in the why behind the customer. And that's such a key thing because this ultimately, as we're deciding what role the agent's going to play, what they need to thrive, that needs to be rooted in purpose. It needs to be rooted in what's going to create a better experience. And so I think looking at, the data to really understand what's driving conversations, what leads to success is very important. And the second thing is you're really much focused on how do you make this personal, right? Because that's the one thing that, a human agent can do inherently better. Yes, AI can certainly surface very critical, very relevant, very comprehensive data about the customer and tailor some of the communication to that customer. When it comes time to really making that personal connection, feeling like you're a friend or a support system, that's really where the human agent's going to still have an advantage. And so giving them what they need to focus on that, focus on not how do I solve a problem with someone paying their bill too late, but instead, how do I talk to this person who has a unique reason for why they pay their bill too late and has a unique reason for not wanting to be charged a late fee? How can I navigate that with them? The more that we can take off those other tasks that are getting in the way of that, the more that we can surface information the agent needs to understand that situation, the better they're able to adapt to that in reality. Now, I know on this next slide, you actually have a scenario of what that might look like for an individual agent. So wondering if you could sort of share that perspective and then walk through how we can sort of not only think about that one scenario, but really kind of, extend that across a lot of organizations.
Yeah, of course. Let's take a look at Alex. Alex is an agent that works for a global brand. She juggles multiple tasks across different tools a day. She has to look at her phone. She has to look at social media. She has to make sure she's logging details. She has to do her reviews and coaching, all in switching screens throughout the day. She encounters friction at certain points in time because customers are coming to her with complex requests, and she has to remember always, how do I do this task? How do I make it simple for them? But also, how do I make sure my average handle time is always in compliant? How am I reaching my SLA? She has this cognitive load where she's not able to actually focus on the customer. She's worried about, how do I hit my metrics? So let's look at the better way that she can actually be unstuck. So the agents have 15 plus systems throughout the day, whether that's on average, I think we've seen from the industry, where it's the CRMs, the order management systems, the knowledge bases, the ticketing systems, everything that's there. they have to spend so much time looking for that information that Alex can't focus on talking to Brian, the customer calling in, asking him to get new glasses. She can't do that. She has to focus on, where do I find all this information? And it takes, and Alex trained up pretty quickly, but most team members take over 90 days to train and become sufficient. And Brian, you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about agents being able to be, they can't be focused. I think that's a fallacy. They can, but they're not being given the training resources. They're being thrown into a fire being like, go handle Frank's conversation. No training. They might get 2 to 3 calls a week with their supervisor being like, how can I do this better? But they're not going to help and be like, you didn't say the script correctly. And they're not closing your conversations fast enough. So the final thing I'll highlight is that 14% of agents, they don't have access to real-time assistance. So they are going through and trying to find things instead of being served up information based on what's happening in the conversation. Now, I say all this to go into the fact that that was the old way. That was something that existed for a long period of time. That doesn't have to be the day now. You can actually have a co-pilot that's always on as a companion to help your team members learn faster, access the information they need, and also make suggestions based on what we see as the best-in-class team members doing. So this becomes, if Brian's the best agent and he knows how to solve all these details, let's take Brian's learnings and how he does this and disseminate it to all the other team members. It's always on. They have access to real-time information. They get real-time opportunities and guidance. And then they're able to, if they forget something, that's okay. They have a co-pilot they can go to ask questions to be like, how do I order Frank new glasses, as that example?
Yeah, that's so critical. And I think just want to make one point of clarification. I think the stat was actually that only 14% have access to that. So that's 86% don't, which really speaks to how many agents are lacking even that basic context for what they need to proceed. You know, you're not having a personalized consultative conversation if you don't have that, which means that you could have the best agent in the world, the most theoretically knowledgeable, the friendliest, the most emotionally intelligent. Without that information, they're not going to be able to really make that connection. And so I think things that can really take away barriers to that and really put everything the agent needs in their fingertips, those are going to be the ones that really unlock true abilities. Now, you know, again, I think the way you think about it, there's a lot of unique ways that you at Sprinklr, you guys use AI to make this a more dynamic, more empowering co-pilot experience. So, you know, you mind walking through some of the capabilities, functionalities, things that lead to your ecosystem being so empowering for employees moving forward?
Yeah, of course. One of the ways is that it starts from the supervisors and those agent managers being able to understand. So let me take a step back. It's not just the agents, it's also the entire ecosystem of customer experience. So this starts with, let's take an example of the supervisors. The supervisors want to get more insight on what's happening within their contact center. Copilots allow them to very easily ask questions around the dashboards, being able to ensure that why did our average handle time go up or go down? Instead of just a graph, you can ask questions and start sourcing this information. But this extends to the actual agents themselves, giving them the tools they need to actually surface up content, actions, and suggestions to actually better close conversations, if that's the goal, or recognize when there are upsells throughout those conversations. And we always have the ability to provide full context. So what that means is that whether Frank is coming in from a phone call or Frank is coming in from a live chat, we're going to be able to serve up a unified view of this customer, giving an overarching idea of Frank came to us 3 times because he lost his glasses. We know he's going to ask us again because he lost his glasses. Let's make sure we are prepared for that. Having those tools are going to allow customers, allow your agents to actually go through and handle the things that were expected them to ask. They already get context. The other major benefit of copilots is that customer experience is not only the contact center, it also extends to your social listening and insights teams, your voice of the customer teams, and your marketing teams that are launching these paid campaigns. Sprinklr believes that copilots are designed to actually help team members across the full breadth of customer experience. So you can have tools where you can find the best content to post. You can find information on and guidelines on we're not following brand guidelines by launching a paid campaign. Or from insights, how you can quickly highlight and identify a trend from both your surveys, both your social listening, and any other data source to make sure that those insights can be sent to the right team members. So Sprinklr's approach to Copilot is throughout the entire customer experience life cycle. We know contact center is a key focus of CCW, but customer experience expands all these areas, and Sprinklr believes Copilots can actually help every single one of these areas and drive efficiencies throughout the business.
And I think, most would appreciate that. I think most here are increasingly recognizing that they don't exist in a vacuum. It's not the contact center or the call center and everybody else. It's one customer experience. And so, you definitely want to be looking at technology that can work across your organization, because even if you are a manager out there, a leader out there who has a very singular focus, what you do is going to be so defined by the entire organization. As you sort of alluded to, Frank, there could be a case where, let's say a brand put out like a mistake in a promo where it said 80% off. It was meant to be like 8% off. And now they're fielding a bunch of conversations of angry customers who aren't getting the promo they thought they were. Having visibility into what that trigger was, what drove those conversations, knowing what happened at different phases of the journey is so critically important for the employee being able to adapt in a customer service context. It's also critical when you think about knowing how to, generate sales, knowing what causes people to buy. If we increasingly see some contact center agents being tasked with upsells and cross sells, having insights that are unified from across the business and surfacing that in the form of a Copilot solution is going to be really key. So whether you're responsible for the entire ecosystem or you're responsible for a small part, your experience benefits when the AI you're using can look across and can automate tasks and can gather data from all key touch points. Now, anything you also want to talk about as far as the AI, in terms of the modeling, how it's trained, security concerns, anything else you want to hit on there?
So a few things to highlight this is that every brand is different. Every brand has different tools and requirements, and they're all unique. That means there's no one size fits all for a Copilot. That's also true for LLMs as a whole. Sprinklr believes in a model dynamic functionality. So when we talk about these Copilots and connecting to different tools, sometimes it makes sense to use a custom model that your organization has built because it's super specific at handling your context. Sometimes it's better just to use OpenAI 4.0 for Mini just to make sure you can summarize a conversation. And that's very simple. So I'm going to date myself a little bit, but in the past, phone numbers and minutes were all the rage. And it was before my time, but I do know, I've heard the stories, I've seen the movies, I understand, and I've worked in the industry long enough to highlight this, but everyone was focused on minutes. But over time, minutes became a commodity, and stop focusing on minutes, stop focusing on minutes, stop focusing on minutes. LLMs are the same thing because they're coming out at such a ferocity. The model you're using today can be surpassed very quickly by something coming out by Vertex or Bedrock or Cohere within a day. So you want to have a tool that allows you to plug and play models to help your teams find the best possible resource. And Sprinklr believes that. We actually have the configuration on our platform to allow you to plug and play models at your choice and bring your own models when necessary, because we know that models change too quickly. And sometimes the tool you thought was great today needs to be switched out because something was released 2 days ago and it does such a better job. Giving you the flexibility means you have to have the door to actually say, we can use these tools, but now we can just start shoving more information in based on what's available. Finding the newest pantry item of the sale is a good way to think of it. We're going to make sure you have the information you need, but it's always able to switch out based on your team's requirements.
Yeah, and then I know that there's other functionalities. I don't know if you want to walk through any of those before we dive into some case studies, but I think there are other things that are going to be critical because, for example, what I thought was maybe fascinating, we just released our market study on modernizing service experiences with AI and digital, and we really asked our audience, what was the one area where you really want to exceed customer expectations, where you feel like you can differentiate based on the experience? And as much as, I want to say it was, above and beyond care or engaging agents or personalization, the actual answer was security and privacy. In an era where there's so much concern about how's my data being used, so much concern about what does, all these automated and digital touch points mean for the way the brand really protects my information, secures my contact, fights against fraud, gives a trusting experience. These are all things that are very top of mind. So organizations above all really see an opportunity to differentiate based on assurance of security, assurance of privacy. I know this is something Sprinklr takes very seriously as well.
It is. And it's something that's actually built into the platform bit. So towards the end of the conversation, after we go through the case studies, we'll see a live example of this. But when we talk about bringing your own models and building your own flows, you also want to have the ability to add the right guardrails, the ability to mask personal identifiable information, to build in particular flows to present hallucinations, but also ensure that no one can do prompt hijacking. With Copilot's a little less concerned because it's all going to be your employees going through and doing this, but you want to make sure you're having the right guardrails in place to prevent an employee from getting the wrong information, the wrong discount code, the wrong percentage they need. So having the ability to identify the guardrails, put them in the flows themselves, and make sure you can monitor and train them is really important. And being able to connect to your models becomes critical. So Sprinklr has the ability to do that throughout our entire platform. So that's where we're going to take that enterprise-grade security to make sure it's not just a guardrail against PII, but it's going into preventing hallucinations, preventing jailbreaking, preventing the ability to actually do system prompting to access information.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why, AI, agent-facing AI has been such a popular use case is because you can really flesh a lot of this out, right? We know that there's risks, there's concerns, there's fears about, like you said, prompt hijacking. There's fears about what a hallucination can mean for a customer who doesn't have any other context. They just get the wrong information in a chatbot and they're like, what do I do about it? And so I think being able to not only to be able to really look at what's happening with how agents are using this technology, where are some needs for guardrails emerging? Where are some risks of inaccuracies emerging? Where are some risks of personal data not being handled correctly are emerging? And really having a solution that can address those and train based on those and improve based on those is going to be key for not only making agents more productive, but really iterating this out and scaling it out to customer facing touch points as well. So, I know, we've talked a lot about the capabilities, the theory, why this all makes sense. But at the end of the day, as much as theory is exciting, practice is what moves the needle. Practice is what gets budget approved. Practice is what drives an ROI. And I know that this is something that you guys have a lot to share when it comes to, real results that you're seeing in the market, real examples of what success looks like. So I want to give you a moment to walk through some of those.
Yeah, of course. So let's look at a market specific where Bain & Company highlighted that copilots aren't hype. They have 15% productivity gains. Microsoft highlighted that AI copilots are transforming how we work, with 75% of knowledge workers using AI to improve measurable gains in speed and creativity. And McKinsey highlighted there's about a 4.4 trillion annual value from generative AI. Great numbers, great metrics, not specific to what we've seen, but let's go through some Sprinklr specific use cases. So with Sprinklr, we have an agent copilot that's been deployed across multiple customers, and we are seeing 100% adoption from these customers with over 2,700 agents using Copilot, improving their average handle time by 16%. That's because this company cares about average handle time, and that's what they're getting value out of the Copilot. We have a leading UK flight operator that saw a 20% improvement in average handle time with Sprinklr Copilot, and a 92% feedback being positive from the actual Copilot users. That's the agent giving thumbs up, thumbs down on the responses they're seeing. They're getting value out of these tools automatically, and we're also tracking this. And finally, we have a global home security brand that saw average handle time improve by 13% by using the agent Copilot. We highlight these examples to showcase that customers are using them today. They're getting value out of these tools. And Brian, to your point, that's actually going to lead to finding those best opportunities to turn more customer-facing bots. We can use agents and the copilots as the test bed to then find out this is working really well for our agents. Let's start testing it with the market, with our customers. Let's put it on a chat bot. Let's put it on a voice bot and see how they're reacting to it, because we know the agents can handle it and they have efficiencies with Copilot.
Yeah, that's a really important point there, because remember, I think one of the other things to think about is it should be so effective that even if the agent didn't have their inherent expertise, their familiarity with broken knowledge base entries or out of date data, that they would be able to thrive. We humans can filter that information if they're an agent who's worked for your company for 15 years. A consumer who's interacting with self-service for the first time, they don't know, hey, this knowledge base entry is way out of whack, it needs to be fixed. They just know what's being put in front of them. And so as we start to look at, not having that layer of filter, that layer of defense, we want to know that like what the AI is doing is clear, it's accurate, it's effective. And I think, like you said, when you start to see these results, you start to see these real efficiency gains, you start to get to the point where agents are overwhelmingly confident in what they're getting from the Copilot, and then overly successful at using that data, using that insight to drive better outcomes. That's where you start to build confidence that, hey, your models are working, they're accurate, they're effective, and they can be deployed at scale. So I think it's really important. Now, I know that you've been teasing this up for a while, and I know our audience is thrilled to see some visuals of what this looks like in practice, how it might be able to help them, and kind of what are some of the unique user experiences and functionalities of what you guys have built.
Yeah, of course. Let me get my screen up and let's take an example walkthrough. So I'm going to tilt my head slightly because I'm looking at a smaller screen. And Brian, can you see this? Okay. So let's take a conversation from the contact center. Let's take an example of we were triaging a conversation and it eventually got routed to an agent. What we can see is an entire conversational history of Brandon Comprero coming into this conversation. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you're seeing the Sprinklr Agent Copilot, where we can have a number of suggested actions that can be customized and augmented per brand. So for example, let's say I want to do a case summary. I want to quickly summarize why someone was accessing this conversation. I know this user was talking about a appointment tracking. They were talking about, and then it's actually providing me the next best actions. So not only is it summarizing this, but it's actually simplifying how I can add this information both to the after call work or the notes of the conversation itself. At the same time, I can get a summarization of the entire customer's history, and this can be presented up to the user. So all these actions, Brendan Comprero is a gold customer with an average value of 300,000. They've engaged multiple times with the brand, and here's the actual previous conversations, regardless of channel, of why Brandon contacted them. They're contacting for assistance options. They keep throwing their glasses away. It gives the agent the opportunity to say, this is why Brandon's going to contact us. Of course, people forget actions, so I can still ask questions. What are our return policies? I just came back from vacation as an agent. Let me ask a question. We're going to be able to start servicing up this information and giving me the ability to answer this actual conversation. And at the same time, we can follow specific tasks, such as going through the order ID. So as an example, you highlighted this in the conversation, or we talked about this example of taking agents away from going to different systems and doing everything in one place. So as this example, I can give an order number that the customer gave me in this conversation, and I'd be able to pull up that order number in the conversation itself. So I can see the actual order number details. I can go through, instead of having to swivel chair from here to there to somewhere else, I can do everything in one spot. And we're going to see in a little bit how that was built. All these tasks can be updated and controlled from a view perspective. We can make it really big. We can make it really small for all your customers. We can make it automatically listen to conversations and start suggesting things. But this is all from the actual agent perspective. But that's not just customer experience. That's only one area. At the same time, we have the ability to talk about the actual social side. So when someone comes through a post, I'm creating a piece of content and I want to say Frank's cool content. Look at our great deals. I can have the ability to make it longer, make it shorter, modify the tone that it follows my brand specific guidelines. Our goal is to help your teams find the very specific details and make sure that they are more efficient throughout their day of this customer experience. And this extends to the actual calendars you see today. You're going to notice throughout the entire demonstration, you're going to see the Sprinklr Copilot available from the service, from the marketing, from insights. And we can see which posts are pending approval status here, as an example, giving me quick insights on what needs to get done. At the same time, I can ask questions on my dashboards themselves, both from a service and from a social aspect, and really across all of our dashboards. I can ask questions and details throughout my entire experience. What posts are getting the most insight? What are the top performing posts? Summarize this entire dashboard. It gives your team the ability to analyze information, but also find suggestions on what they can do better for the future. And that extends into full-on listening, where you can actually understand what's happening across an entire brand, where you're going to see very easily from social listening what people are talking about us. How does this help me better find content to publish that leads to someone contacting our brand? We can summarize and add widget summaries to conversations. The Copilot allows you to ask questions in a meaningful way to easily string conversations together. And it extends even to our marketing. We're going to be able to ask questions on that same editorial calendar, but also summarizing when details are not compliant, when someone is not in compliance with the guidelines, or there's an ad set that has a budget threshold, or we have the ability to understand and highlight when we're not following our brand guidelines throughout these conversations. And I highlight all this because all of it can be controlled and understood through Sprinklr AI Studio, meaning we can bring additional providers. We have out-of-the-box providers available, but if a client wanted to bring a custom provider, bring their own keys, or bring their own custom model, you can. We can make that very easy to use this across the platform. We then can go through and actually highlight the guardrails, turning on PII masking, adding a new potential guardrail that can be used throughout the conversations and the AI tools. At the same time, and I know we focused on copilots today, but Sprinklr can build fully autonomous agentic bots with AI agents, or we can customize copilots that allow us to build the best possible copilot, adding new tasks and details, making sure I can optimize and build a new copilot for service, build an updated copilot for marketing and social. And finally, being able to build specific flows across all our different product suites that if I go for the example of modify tone, and I click on modify tone, just as the example, I'm going to be able to start editing this prompt as necessary, adding specific details and selecting that model. So I'd have the ability to plug and play models throughout all of our tools to ensure that a client will be able to use the best model at the best time to solve their particular use case throughout the entire customer experience journey. And Brian, I know I went through that quickly. I want to make sure we highlighted this to the team, or I say team, I mean individuals watching the webinar, but any questions on what I've showcased so far?
Well, one, I think team's fine. I think we're all united in our desire to make agents more empowered and to make customer experiences better. But I think, too, what was really fascinating to me is not only were the recommendations relevant and the automations very effective, but I think that recognition that customer service exists within a contextual ecosystem, that it exists within certain brands having a great day on social media, others being bashed on social media. These all come together to really inform the sentiment that customers have, the expectations they have. And so this really further underscores what you brought up earlier, the importance of being able to run this across the entire customer journey, across all touch points, because all that information is going to affect what happens in that conversation. You know, you don't want to make the mistake of assuming that a call went poorly because the agent wasn't good, when in reality, the call went poorly because, you know, they didn't get what they were looking for in self-service, and they didn't get what they were looking for in social. And then by the time they got to the phone agent, they were so fed up that they weren't going to take anything but $1 million to be happy. You know, that's where you start to get to the point where you get a lot of context. And so I think that's something that works really well here, you know, and so really for me, I think the key is, you know, also, you know, how do you recommend starting with, you know, certain, you know, segments of your customer experience? Do you recommend starting with certain types of issues, or is this kind of the thing that you deploy and it kind of just gets bigger and bigger over time, but you really shouldn't set any particular parameters on what you focus on?
So everything from a reporting copilot, everything that's just going to help people become a little more efficient, start right away. Make sure you can make adjustments and make this grow. From the service copilots, make sure you can start and actually go through and build the right tools that help these customers. That is going to be a little more specific. It's going to take a little bit of time, but we have to start by understanding the why and then giving the agents to answer that why when customers come into that conversation. But as this grows, as you start using these tools, getting more efficiency gains, getting more value, you can start branching and updating your particular tasks. You can add new tasks to the Copilot. You can take tasks that are working on Copilot and make it more self-service when it's relevant. So starting by utilizing these tools, you're going to make sure you have the data to understand what's working well, and then start adapting and figuring out what will make this better over time. So that is, I think, the approach I would recommend to customers, is highlighting, especially for the reporting and details and copilots, it's your team. They can use this. They can go through and give you feedback that is going to better help your end users in the future and still give them value in their day-to-day.
Now, one final question I have as we sort of reach the end of the discussion here is, when we talk about the idea of rallying organizations, getting buy-in, it's often trying to get the top of our organization to support it. We need their budget, we need their approval. And I think a lot of what you've shown certainly appeals to them, right? You're going to have more efficiency, you're going to have better chances of sales, better chances of putting out fires, all things that very much matter to, those who are very concerned with the finances and the overall health of an organization. But it's equally important and sometimes forgotten to think about how you get the front line invested, because none of this works if they're not actively using it, if they're not actually believing in how can I make the most of Copilot. And because if they don't have that mindset, not only are you not going to get the gains you're looking for, but you're not going to learn maybe areas where it can improve, areas where you do need to do retraining, areas where you do need to recalibrate the certain processes and tasks that it can perform. So what are some perspectives on really rallying the frontline or the supervisor to get immersed in this technology? And then how do you sort of assess whether they're using it correctly, whether they're bought in, what you can learn from that interaction?
So it's all about, you said it yourself, what's in it for me? Well, how does this make my life better and easier? So you want to appeal to that core concept of the team members. When I'm talking to supervisors and team members who would use these tools, I want to understand how, I'm going to say this in the right way, but how are they compensated? And how are they actually being judged on their performance? Because that's how we're going to make sure that they know how to get the most value out of this tool. And I say that to mean, to give them the tools to do a Copilot is great, but we want to make sure that their Copilot is focused on reducing average handle time, or their Copilots are focused on improving cross-sells and upsells. Not every Copilot is equal, but we want to make sure that it's focused on their key parameters, their KPIs that will actually drive them to the benefit, drive them to achieving their goals. Focusing on the why for them is just as important as focusing on the why on the top down for the organization.
Yeah, and so as we wrap up here, Frank, I want to thank you so much. I think that demo was really fascinating to really see what this looks like in practice. But the results you shared, the stats you shared, the framework you shared, also extremely empowering for our audience. And ultimately, when we think about the future of the tech versus humanity dynamic, or the AI human interplay, we know that it's not just about giving humans more time. We know that it's not just about giving them more data. Certainly, those both help, but really, it's about empowering them in a human-centric way, giving them the types of information that will make them better at understanding, connecting, and adapting to a customer, performing the tasks that will give them the ability to think more critically about what matters, allowing them to understand how everything's coming together to define what this customer is going to be looking for and how they can excel at delivering it. And then, of course, excel at impressing their bosses, their supervisors, the people who are judging them as well. This way of approaching Copilot, this way of approaching AI, it's clear that you're attacking it from a very human-centric lens, that you want to look at not what's all the information I can give the agent so they seem like an intellectual expert, but instead, what's the right information, the right things that I can do for them, the right way to guide them so they come across as more empathetic, more human, more aware, and more capable of building relationships and establishing connections. I love that mindset. I love that approach. And certainly it's one that I think a lot of our audience is really going to resonate with. But as we wrap up here, Frank, any final thoughts for our crowd?
No, Brian, I just want to thank you for allowing me to have the opportunity to speak to you today. I hope the discussion was insightful for the audience, and feel free to reach out to myself and the Sprinklr team if you have any questions on any of the topics or tools we focused on today.
Great. Well, Frank, I want to thank you and Sprinklr once again. I want to thank everyone who joined us, who proved their commitment to synergizing humans and AI in the contact center and the customer experience and really the overall ecosystem. That's what's going to take our industry forward. That's what's going to take customer connections from something we wish we could do to something that we regularly achieve day in and day out and really build our brands on the basis of that principle. So thanks so much to everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure. On behalf of CCW Digital, we'll talk to you next time.